The story of Edinburgh's underground begins not in darkness, but in the ambition of a city determined to rise above its own limitations. By the mid-18th century, the capital of Scotland had become a paradox of brilliance and decay. Above ground, the Scottish Enlightenment was flourishing. Men like David Hume and Adam Smith were redefining the nature of reason, economy, and science. Yet just a few hundred yards away from the lecture halls and drawing rooms of the intellectual elite, the old town was choking beneath the weight of its own past. The city's medieval heart was a warren of narrow closes and towering tenements, some reaching 14 stories high. With no room to expand horizontally, Edinburgh had grown vertically, stacking generations on top of each other like geological strata. Below the cobbled streets, beneath the stone archways and crowded buildings, space itself had become a precious commodity. That hunger for expansion, combined with a stubborn topography, would give birth to one of the strangest and most misunderstood architectural projects in Britain, the creation of an underground city hidden beneath the South Bridge. In 1785, after decades of overcrowding and unsanitary living conditions in the Old Town, the City Council approved a radical project: the construction of a bridge that would connect the commercial heart of the Old Town with the newly developed South Side. The idea was simple: build a bridge high enough to span the valley between the two districts and line it with buildings, so that it would appear as a seamless continuation of the street itself. The result would be the South Bridge, completed in 1788, a structure that was both an engineering marvel and a complex piece of urban architecture. But beneath its elegant facades lay a hidden world of arches and vaults, spaces that would soon take on a life of their own. The bridge was designed by architect Robert Kay and built from sandstone quarried from the nearby Craigleith Quarry. It stretched 1,136 feet in length, supported by 19 arches, though only one, the Cowgate Arch, was visible to the public. The others were buried beneath masonry, creating enclosed chambers between the bridge's supporting arches and the buildings that flanked it. These hollow spaces were intended to serve practical purposes: storage for merchants, workshops for craftsmen, and wine cellars for the taverns that lined the new street above. They were not meant to be sinister nor mysterious. In their conception, they were a triumph of urban ingenuity, every cubic foot of space in use, nothing wasted. But almost immediately after their completion, problems began to appear. Edinburgh's climate, famously damp and unpredictable, combined with poor sealing of the bridge's stone joints, led to severe water ingress. Rainwater seeped through the cracks in the masonry, trickling down from the street above and collecting in the vaulted chambers below. Within a few short years, the once pristine spaces had become damp, foul-smelling, and inhospitable. Merchants abandoned them, craftsmen moved their workshops elsewhere, and the vaults began their slow descent from innovation to infamy. By the turn of the 19th century, the spaces beneath the South Bridge had taken on a different kind of population. As the Industrial Revolution drew workers into the city, Edinburgh's Old Town became more crowded than ever. The poorest residents, immigrants, laborers, and the destitute, found shelter in the only places left: the abandoned vaults beneath the bridge. For a few shillings a month, they could rent a pitch-black room with a floor of packed earth and no ventilation. Dozens of families lived side by side in the damp half-light of candle flames, their meager belongings suspended from the dripping ceilings to keep them dry. Crime flourished in this underworld. Smugglers used the vaults to move contraband unseen by the city watch. Illicit distillers set up crude stills in the deeper chambers. Prostitution and gambling dens thrived, shielded by layers of stone from the world above. By the 1820s, police raids began uncovering evidence of even darker activities. The vaults had become a refuge not only for the city's poor, but for its criminal underclass. Stolen goods were hidden in bricked-up rooms, counterfeiters operated presses in the shadows, and in the years surrounding the Burke and Hare murders of 1828, rumors spread that some of the bodies sold to medical schools for dissection had come from victims who had vanished beneath the South Bridge. Though there is no definitive evidence that the vaults were directly linked to those crimes, the timing and the proximity to the Old Town slums made the connection plausible enough to fuel decades of speculation. By the mid-19th century, the city authorities had finally had enough. The vaults, now recognized as a public health hazard, were cleared and sealed. Many entrances were bricked up. The chambers disappeared from maps and memory, their stories buried under the march of time. The South Bridge itself remained in constant use, and the world above continued as if nothing lay beneath it but solid rock. For over a century, the vaults were forgotten, sealed behind layers of stone and silence. When they were rediscovered in the 1980s during renovation works on buildings along Blair Street and Niddry Street, what archaeologists and explorers found was a time capsule of misery and survival. Piles of broken bottles, clay pipes, children's toys, and even fragments of clothing lay preserved in the mud. These relics painted a vivid picture of life below, of people who had lived, worked, and died in a space the world had long since abandoned. To understand the scale of what was rediscovered, one must imagine the vaults as a three-dimensional labyrinth, a network of more than 100 chambers extending beneath multiple city blocks. Some are small enough to barely fit a person standing upright. Others stretch 20 feet across, supported by massive stone ribs. The air inside is thick and cool, carrying the scent of earth and age. The walls bear traces of soot from candles and fires long extinguished. Some vaults still show the remains of rough brick walls, dividing them into makeshift rooms. In one chamber, archaeologists discovered the remnants of a simple clay fireplace. In another, the charred bones of a small animal, perhaps a meal prepared by one of the forgotten families who once lived there. The layers of soot and sediment tell a silent story, each one a generation of survival beneath the streets. For years after their rediscovery, historians struggled to piece together the timeline of the vault's occupation. No official records were ever kept of who lived there, who rented the spaces, or who died within them. The people who occupied the vaults existed outside the city's social and bureaucratic structures. They were, in every sense, invisible citizens. But through fragments, newspaper reports, police ledgers, and archaeological evidence, a narrative began to emerge. The vaults were active from roughly 1790 to 1860, with their population peaking in the 1830s and 1840s during periods of severe economic hardship. When the city expanded into the new town and housing conditions improved for the working class, the vaults emptied out once again. Silence reclaimed the space. Dust and water did the rest. Yet, like so much of Edinburgh's history, the vaults refused to remain buried. By the late 20th century, as urban explorers and historians began to map the hidden layers of the city, new stories emerged. Some came from construction workers who claimed to hear footsteps in sealed corridors, others from local residents who spoke of cold drafts and whispers through the cracks in old basements. Though the historian's lens separates myth from fact, it is difficult to deny the presence of something hauntingly human in those chambers, a sense that the walls themselves have memory. The rediscovery of the Southbridge vaults was not just an archaeological event, it was a revelation of continuity. Beneath the Georgian and Victorian stonework lay the unbroken lineage of Edinburgh's human story. Ingenuity, suffering, and survival intertwined. The same city that had built monuments to reason and enlightenment had also, quite literally, buried its poor beneath them. That duality would come to define Edinburgh's underground, not as a place of ghosts or curses, but as a mirror held up to the contradictions of the city itself. When the Edinburgh vaults were sealed in the mid-19th century, it was never intended as a deliberate burial of history. The city simply moved on. Generations passed, and the people who had once lived in those underground chambers faded from record. By the 20th century, the South Bridge was just another busy thoroughfare of a modern city, its dark underbelly forgotten. But in 1985, renovation work on a tavern at 1 Blair Street accidentally opened a bricked-up passage. Behind the wall lay a small stone chamber, damp but intact, with soot-blackened ceilings and a floor of compacted earth. The owners, curious, began to explore further. What they found was the first entrance into a subterranean complex that no one alive even knew existed. The rediscovery quickly drew the attention of historians and archaeologists from the University of Edinburgh. Initial surveys confirmed that these were indeed the long-lost Southbridge vaults, sealed for over a century. Within weeks, entire corridors were mapped, revealing dozens of interconnected chambers stretching beneath Blair Street and Niddry Street. The air inside was thick with centuries of decay. Mud caked the floors, dripping water echoed through the archways, and in some chambers, layers of debris were stacked waist-high. Glass fragments, pottery, bones, rusted tools, and scraps of leather. It was as if time itself had congealed beneath the city. One of the earliest to study the vaults was Norrie Rowan, a former Scottish rugby player turned publican, who in 1985 purchased a property above part of the structure. While clearing debris from a basement passage, he uncovered a narrow stone staircase leading downward. Rowan and a few colleagues descended by flashlight, stepping into darkness that hadn't seen human presence since the Victorian era. They found bottles still corked, clay pipes embedded in the silt, and on one wall, a faint mark made by a candle flame that had burned over 100 years before. The discovery quickly spread through local media, and soon urban explorers and historians began to piece together the forgotten story of Edinburgh's underworld. Archaeological teams worked cautiously. Each vault was documented, its measurements taken, and soil samples collected. The findings painted a picture of daily life in astonishing detail. Clay fragments bore fingerprints, proof of handmade pots used by the poorest residents. Buttons, shoe soles, and a child's toy rattle were unearthed, still recognizable beneath layers of grime. In one vault, investigators found the charred remains of a small fire, its ashes mixed with animal bones, suggesting people had cooked here long after the space was deemed unfit for habitation. The deeper archaeologists went, the more complex the structure became. Some vaults showed evidence of having been repartitioned, with crude walls of brick and stone dividing larger chambers into smaller rented spaces. In others, black mold and condensation formed glistening sheets that testified to decades of trapped moisture. As research expanded, scholars began to reconstruct the history of the vaults through a combination of physical evidence and historical records. The first leases granted by the city chamber date from 1788 to 1795, issued mostly to merchants dealing in wine, textiles, and iron goods. Invoices from that era mention South Bridge storage or bridge cellars, though none make direct reference to residential use. By 1805, complaints began to appear in civic records about water damage and unusable space. The complaints ended abruptly by 1815, an eerie silence historians now interpret as evidence that the vaults were abandoned by legitimate businesses and taken over by those operating outside the law. The rediscovery also brought with it renewed speculation. Locals spoke of sounds, knocking, footsteps, or distant voices echoing through sealed passages. Guides claimed to feel sudden changes in temperature or hear faint sobbing in the deeper vaults. Though most of these stories belong to folklore rather than fact, they underscore a psychological truth. The atmosphere inside those chambers is unlike anything above ground. Even in daylight, artificial lamps barely illuminate the sooty walls. The air is heavy and motionless, and the acoustics create disorienting echoes. Many researchers who entered alone described the feeling as oppressive, almost sentient. In 1996, the city of Edinburgh officially opened parts of the vaults to the public under guided tours. Preservationists installed safety lighting and reinforced the most fragile ceilings with steel braces. The intention was twofold: to make the site accessible and to prevent ongoing decay caused by moisture. Since then, archaeologists have continued to explore lesser-known sections not open to visitors, including sealed rooms discovered during infrastructure repairs in 2003 and 2014. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed that additional chambers may still lie hidden beneath South Bridge's southern approach, though excavation would risk destabilizing existing foundations. One of the most significant findings came from a vault on Nidri Street, where layers of compacted sediment were excavated in 2002. Beneath the top layer of 19th-century refuse lay an earlier stratum dated to the 1790s, containing fragments of imported pottery from the Netherlands and a bronze coin minted during the reign of George III. The mixture of domestic and industrial debris suggests the vaults were used simultaneously for living and for production, perhaps small-scale manufacturing such as cobbling or metalwork. This dual use reflected Edinburgh's economic reality at the time. Poverty and enterprise were inseparable. Over time, the rediscovery of the vaults transformed from a local curiosity into a symbol of Edinburgh's layered identity. Newspapers called them the city's buried heart. Documentaries aired in the late 1990s and early 2000s brought the story to international audiences, often focusing on the human drama rather than the engineering. Yet the truth remained compelling even without embellishment. The vaults demonstrated how urban progress could conceal entire chapters of history, literally buried beneath the footsteps of daily life. As the site gained recognition, new questions emerged. How many people had actually lived there? What diseases spread through the stagnant air? And how far did the network truly extend? While early explorers believed the vaults stretched across much of the old town, later surveys confirmed that most chambers lay directly under the South Bridge itself, with a few extending into adjacent properties. However, scattered rumors persist of older tunnels leading toward the Cowgate or connecting to medieval basements deeper still. Some of these may stem from confusion with Edinburgh's other subterranean spaces, such as Mary King's Close. a preserved 17th century street buried under the Royal Exchange. Both sites share a similar atmosphere, but their origins are distinct. The vaults were built deliberately as part of the bridge's structure, whereas Mary King's Close was gradually covered as the city expanded. The rediscovery of the vaults in the 1980s forced Edinburgh to confront the physical reality of its history. For more than a century, people had walked across South Bridge believing it solid beneath their feet. In truth, they had been walking above the ghosts of their own past, merchants, laborers, and families entombed by neglect. Each chamber told a story not of ghosts, but of survival against impossible odds. That realization gave the vaults their enduring power. They are less about haunting and more about humanity. The rediscovery of the vaults in the 1980s sparked a fascination that spread quickly beyond the boundaries of Edinburgh. What had started as a chance find during renovation soon became a symbol of the city's hidden past. Journalists wrote about it, archaeologists debated it, and locals began sharing stories their grandparents had told them. Stories of secret rooms, lost goods, and ghosts that refused to rest. Yet, beneath the growing myth, the reality was even more compelling. The vaults weren't simply ruins or relics. They were a buried neighborhood, a fossilized layer of urban life. In 1996, the first official tours were launched, giving the public their first sanctioned glimpse into the chambers beneath South Bridge. What struck visitors most was the atmosphere. The air was still, thick with centuries of moisture, and every sound seemed to linger too long. The narrow corridors, lit only by dim bulbs, revealed uneven walls of stone and mortar glistening with condensation. On some surfaces, faint handprints could be seen in the old soot, a ghostly trace of the people who had once lived there. The guides told stories, both verified and rumored, about the vault's darker days. Illegal whiskey stills, stolen corpses, and entire families who lived and died in the pitch black. Even for those skeptical of the supernatural, the place felt undeniably charged with history. Soon after the tours began, archaeologists conducted deeper excavations in the sections not open to the public. These studies revealed how quickly human presence had transformed the vaults. Layers of ash and refuse built up with astonishing speed, sometimes several inches thick per decade. This indicated constant use, perhaps by dozens of families at a time. Researchers found nails embedded in the stone walls, suggesting that occupants had strung ropes or wires to hang belongings above the damp floor. Soot analysis showed that fires had been maintained in certain chambers almost continuously, filling the air with dense smoke that left black stains across the ceilings. Microscopic samples even revealed residues of animal fat, a crude form of fuel used when candles were too expensive to afford. By the late 1990s, the vaults had become one of Edinburgh's most visited underground sites, rivaling the famous Mary King's Close for attention. Tour companies emphasized the mysterious side, often describing the vaults as haunted or cursed. But to historians, the true fascination lay in how the vaults mirrored the contradictions of 19th century urban life. Above ground, elegant Georgian architecture symbolized progress and enlightenment. Below, in the damp and dark, the forgotten poor had carved out a parallel existence. These two realities coexisted, separated by only a few feet of stone. The city government faced a dilemma: how to preserve this fragile piece of history while allowing people to experience it. Excavation posed a constant risk. The walls, saturated with moisture and centuries of weight from above, could easily collapse if disturbed. Engineers installed drainage systems to reduce seepage and reinforced critical arches with modern supports. Even so, access remained limited. Only a fraction of the vaults could safely accommodate visitors. Beyond the known chambers lay dozens more, sealed off, flooded, or too unstable to enter. Some may never be explored. Despite the caution, new discoveries continued to surface. In 2003, work on a nearby building exposed a hidden stairway leading into a previously undocumented section. Inside were small artifacts, a broken clay pipe, shards of green glass, and the rusted hinge of what had once been a door. In 2014, ground-penetrating radar revealed another series of chambers beneath South Bridge's southern slope. These appeared to be older, perhaps predating the bridge itself, hinting that parts of the vault network may incorporate remnants of medieval basements that were repurposed during construction. While definitive proof is still lacking, it's possible that Edinburgh's underground is a palimpsest of different centuries layered together, each leaving its mark on the stone. Today, the vaults are part of the city's official heritage. Guided tours operate year-round, and while some emphasize the paranormal, others focus on the verified archaeology. Visitors walk through corridors once filled with smoke and voices, past walls blackened by the fires of forgotten tenants. They see the indentations in the floor where barrels once rested and the rough niches where candles burned. For a few moments, they experience the echo of a world that was never meant to exist but did, out of necessity, poverty, and resilience. For archaeologists, the vaults represent a challenge as much as an opportunity. The lack of written documentation means every artifact, every layer of soil, must speak for itself. The fragments recovered, bone buttons, iron nails, scraps of cloth, are more than curiosities. They are evidence of a society pushed underground by circumstance, surviving in conditions that defied health and dignity. The vaults expose a truth about cities, that progress often hides its costs beneath the surface. Public interest, however, has also shaped how the vaults are remembered. The most persistent rumors involve tunnels connecting the vaults to other parts of the city, to Greyfriars Kirkyard, to the Cowgate, even to the sea. Most of these stories lack credible evidence. The vault's design simply doesn't support such extensive connections. Yet their persistence reflects something deeper about human nature. We are drawn to the idea that history hides secrets just out of reach. Every shadowed archway or sealed door becomes a promise that there is still something left to uncover. Another enduring myth is that the vaults were used to store plague victims. In truth, the last major plague outbreak in Edinburgh occurred long before the bridge's construction in the 17th century. But the damp, airless chambers make the rumor feel believable, and so it endures. Similarly, tales of hidden treasure or ancient cults have circulated for decades, blending fragments of truth with imagination. The real story, though less sensational, is far more haunting. The vaults are not cursed. They are simply witnesses. Silent, enduring witnesses to human desperation and ingenuity. Over time, the vaults have come to symbolize the layered soul of Edinburgh. Above ground stands a city of intellect, culture, and art, a showcase of Scotland's finest minds. Beneath it lies a darker reflection carved in stone and shadow. The two are inseparable. In the space between them, one can almost feel the heartbeat of history itself. By the early 2000s, the South Bridge vaults had become a rare intersection between archaeology and public fascination. The deeper researchers dug, the more layers of meaning emerged. The vaults were no longer viewed merely as a curiosity beneath a city. They were a living document of social history, showing how progress and poverty had coexisted in the same space. Every object uncovered told part of that story. Each coin, shard, and hand-forged nail revealed how people adapted to the claustrophobic world beneath the bridge. Archaeologists began to describe the vaults as a vertical cross-section of urban life, a microcosm of a city stacked on itself. Detailed studies of the materials found in the vaults revealed something striking. Soil samples contained traces of human waste, ash, and animal fat, layered with soot and industrial residue. Chemical testing confirmed what early observers had guessed. The vaults had been used simultaneously as living quarters, workshops, and dumping grounds. People slept beside their work tools, cooked where they stored waste, and built fragile communities in conditions no city above ground could ever officially acknowledge. The poverty was unimaginable by modern standards, but it also demonstrated the human capacity to endure. Beneath one of Europe's intellectual capitals, people had created an invisible world, unseen but very much alive. Archaeologists cataloged thousands of objects: clay smoking pipes, fragments of crockery imported from England and the Netherlands, corroded belt buckles, and handmade nails. The vaults were full of evidence that, despite the squalor, life continued with moments of normalcy. Toys were found alongside tools, suggesting children lived here too. A woman's shoe, its leather softened by centuries underground, was discovered near the remnants of a candle. Nearby, a broken mug still bore the faint pattern of blue glaze. These weren't relics of a lost civilization. They were the debris of ordinary lives crushed under extraordinary hardship. As scholars studied the vaults more closely, they began to question earlier assumptions. The image of the vaults as a single underworld of crime and misery, while partly true, oversimplified their history. Some vaults had clearly been used for legitimate commerce well into the 19th century. Others may have housed artisans, cobblers, and traders who preferred to work in the shelter of the bridge rather than on the crowded streets above. There were layers to the story, literally and figuratively. The deeper one went, the more complex the human narrative became. Preserving that complexity became a new challenge. The damp air, Constant seepage and fluctuating temperatures made conservation nearly impossible. Each year, stone decayed and metal corroded further. Preservation teams installed ventilation systems and moisture barriers, but the environment remained unstable. Some chambers were too fragile to enter at all. Engineers debated whether the vaults could ever be fully stabilized without compromising the integrity of the bridge itself. The city faced a choice between preservation and access. To open more of the vaults to the public would risk irreversible damage. To seal them again would be to bury history for a second time. Tourism, meanwhile, transformed the vaults into something beyond their historical origins. By the 2000s, multiple tour companies offered different experiences: historical, archaeological, and supernatural. Some leaned heavily into ghost stories, claiming the vaults were among the most haunted places in Britain. Visitors reported cold spots, flickering lights, and sudden feelings of unease. Skeptics dismissed these as psychological effects caused by darkness, humidity, and suggestion, but the stories persisted. Historians largely ignored the paranormal angle, though many admitted that even without ghosts, the vaults possessed an undeniable presence. The weight of history itself seemed to fill the space. Academic interest continued to grow. The University of Edinburgh and Historic Environment Scotland collaborated on digital mapping projects to create a full 3D model of the vaults, allowing researchers to study the architecture without physically entering the unstable sections. Laser scans revealed previously unknown recesses and structural irregularities, including several chambers that had been partially filled during the 19th century. Some of these were likely abandoned attempts to create new storage areas. Others may have been sealed intentionally to prevent flooding. Each discovery deepened the mystery, not of the supernatural, but of the city's pragmatic adaptation to its own geography. One of the most revealing findings came not from the vaults themselves, but from the buildings above them. When construction crews examined the basements of structures along South Bridge, they found connecting stairways and blocked doorways that led directly downward into the buried chambers. These physical links showed that for much of the 19th century, the underground and the surface world were not separate. They interacted daily. A tavern might store its wine below, a cobbler might descend from his workshop to fetch materials. A family might live directly beneath a merchant's shop, unseen but only feet away. The vaults were not a different world. They were the same world, simply one level lower. To understand their significance, it helps to look beyond the architecture. The vaults embody the contradictions of urban progress. They were built as a triumph of engineering, yet became a refuge for those excluded from that very progress. They demonstrate how cities evolve through layers of necessity, how wealth builds above poverty, and how, over time, memory hardens into stone. For historians, the vaults are not just an archaeological site, but a moral mirror. They remind us that the beauty of a city's skyline often depends on what lies buried beneath it. In recent years, Edinburgh has embraced that dual legacy. The vaults are now part of walking tours, documentaries, and museum exhibits. They feature in university courses on urban archaeology and social history. And yet, even with all this attention, much of the underground remains unexplored. Beneath the bridge, sealed behind brick and darkness, dozens of chambers still wait in silence. Some may hold nothing more than damp stone. Others may preserve the traces of lives no record ever mentioned. The idea that there are still stories trapped beneath the city gives the vaults their lasting power. They are unfinished history, an open question carved in rock. Even now, researchers continue to debate the full extent of Edinburgh's underground. Some believe the vaults connect indirectly with older tunnels dating back to the medieval period. Others think they are isolated relics of the 18th century. What everyone agrees on is that the vaults changed how we see the city. They proved that beneath every street and building lies another layer of story, one that does not always fit the polished narrative of progress. The vaults are not a mystery to be solved, but a reminder of how fragile civilization is when built on top of its own forgotten foundations. By the 21st century, the South Bridge vaults had moved beyond archaeology and into legend. What began as a rediscovery in the 1980s evolved into one of Edinburgh's most powerful cultural symbols, a place where the city's physical and psychological landscapes overlapped. For locals, the vaults were no longer just a curiosity beneath the cobblestones. They were a reminder of everything that lay hidden beneath progress, poverty, resilience, and the forgotten lives that built the city's foundations. The media played a defining role in this transformation. Television documentaries, travel programs, and later, online videos introduced the vaults to global audiences. Each retelling added a new layer to the mythology. Some emphasized the historical, the engineering of the South Bridge, the archaeology of rediscovery. Others lean toward the sensational, the hauntings, the murders, the whispers in the dark. The vaults became a blank canvas onto which storytellers projected their own visions of the past. Every echoing corridor, every dripping archway became a stage for imagination. Yet even as popular culture embellished the story, the truth remained powerful enough on its own. Visitors who descended into the vaults expecting cheap thrills often came away shaken not by ghosts, but by the stark evidence of human suffering. The soot-stained ceilings, the cramped living spaces, and the damp that still seeps through the walls speak of lives lived in darkness. The vaults force an encounter with the realities of 19th-century urban poverty that few museums could ever replicate. As one historian wrote, "It's not what you see down there that haunts you, it's what you imagine." Tourism gave the vaults a new life. Thousands now walk the same passages that were once considered unfit for human habitation. Some sections have been stabilized and fitted with modern lighting. Others remain untouched, their walls glistening with condensation, their air heavy and still. Guides lead groups through the labyrinth, telling stories of merchants, smugglers, and lost souls. In certain chambers, the temperature drops sharply, a natural effect of underground air pockets, though one often mistaken for something supernatural. Tour operators use these moments skillfully, letting silence do the storytelling. The vaults need no embellishment. Their presence alone is enough to unsettle even the skeptical. Despite their popularity, serious academic study continues. Anthropologists examine how collective memory shapes the way people experience historical spaces. Psychologists study why humans are drawn to darkness, why places like the vaults, catacombs, and abandoned tunnels hold such enduring appeal. Part of it, researchers suggest, is that the underground represents everything cities try to conceal: decay, mortality, and the inevitability of time. In that sense, the vaults are not just an archaeological site, they're a confrontation with the shadow of civilization itself. In Edinburgh, this duality has become part of the city's identity. The skyline, dominated by spires and stone, represents enlightenment, intellect, and order. Beneath it lies a network of hidden spaces that symbolize chaos, mystery, and survival. The contrast is almost poetic. Above, the rational mind of the Scottish Enlightenment; below, the raw instinct of human endurance. Tourists walk the Royal Mile, visiting monuments to reason and philosophy, unaware that just beneath their feet lies a record of the city's most primal struggles. This tension between light and dark, seen and unseen, defines Edinburgh more than any single monument. The vaults have also inspired a wave of artistic interpretations. Writers, filmmakers, and musicians have used them as settings for fiction and metaphor. In novels, they appear as gateways to hidden societies or time-worn secrets. In films, they serve as stand-ins for the subconscious, the part of the city and of humanity that cannot be civilized away. Even street artists have invoked their imagery, painting murals of arches and shadowed faces that echo the underground's mood. The vaults have become not just a place, but a language, a way of speaking about the hidden past. For those who study urban history, the vaults raise deeper questions about what a city chooses to remember. When South Bridge was built in the 1780s, it represented progress and innovation, the uniting of Edinburgh's old and new towns. But progress always casts a shadow. The vaults remind us that every monument to modernity has its forgotten underbelly. Every triumph of architecture hides an unintended consequence. The story of the vaults is not unique to Edinburgh. Versions of it exist beneath Paris, Naples, London, and New York. But nowhere else has the tension between surface and depth been so beautifully literal. Preservationists continue to debate the vault's future. Some advocate for full restoration, stabilizing and opening more chambers for public access. Others argue that the vaults should remain partly sealed, preserved in darkness to protect what time has not yet erased. Both views carry weight. To expose the vaults completely would risk losing their mystery. To leave them untouched would mean allowing decay to finish what history began. Perhaps the true solution lies in balance, to reveal just enough for the living to remember, while letting the rest belong to silence. As the decades pass, the vaults endure much as they always have, damp, dark, and indifferent to the world above. The hum of traffic filters faintly through the stone, blending with the sound of water dripping from the ceilings. The air smells of earth and age. It is easy to forget, standing there, that only a few feet overhead, the city continues in its rhythm of modern life. The contrast is almost surreal. Above ground, neon lights and car engines. Below, candlelit walls and the whisper of footsteps. Long gone. Time collapses in those tunnels. The centuries sit side by side, indistinguishable in the half-light. For Edinburgh, the vaults are more than history. They are a mirror, a reflection of how progress, beauty, and decay coexist. They remind us that every civilization builds over the bones of the old, and that the past never truly disappears. It simply waits beneath the surface, listening. And in the quiet, beneath South Bridge, where the air grows colder and the stone breathes with the weight of centuries, that truth feels unmistakably alive. In recent years, Edinburgh's underground has entered a new chapter, one defined not by excavation but by preservation through technology. The vaults beneath South Bridge, once forgotten and then sensationalized, are now being studied with tools that their builders could never have imagined. What was once uncovered with shovels and lanterns is now explored through lasers, scanners, and digital reconstruction. The goal has changed from digging deeper to seeing clearer, to understand without destroying. Archaeologists from Historic Environment Scotland and the University of Edinburgh began a multi-phase digital preservation project in the late 2000s. Using LiDAR scanning, ground-penetrating radar, and high-resolution photogrammetry, they created the first complete 3D model of the South Bridge vaults. Every wall, arch, and uneven floor was mapped with millimeter accuracy. The resulting digital vault became a virtual time capsule, a record that could outlast the physical structure itself. For the first time, researchers could explore sections too dangerous for human entry, walking through the entire network in virtual space. Some of the newly mapped chambers showed evidence of previous collapse, their ceilings buckled under the weight of centuries. Others revealed perfectly preserved tool marks, the fingerprints of 18th century masons still visible in the stone. This digital mapping project changed the way historians approached the vaults. Instead of treating them as a single site frozen in time, researchers began to see them as a system, one that evolved, decayed, and adapted over more than 2 centuries. The data revealed subtle architectural differences between chambers, suggesting multiple construction phases and later modifications. Some of the vault's walls bore signs of reconstruction using 19th century brickwork, possibly after partial collapses. Others contained reused stone blocks scavenged from older medieval buildings demolished during the city's expansion. In essence, the vaults were not just one story, they were many, written layer upon layer in stone. For conservationists, the digital vault served another purpose. It provided a blueprint for preservation. Engineers could now identify weak points, track water seepage, and monitor structural shifts in real time using sensors installed throughout the chambers. Temperature and humidity were logged continuously, helping specialists predict where mold and mineral growth would accelerate decay. This data-driven approach marked a turning point. Instead of reacting to damage, preservation teams could anticipate it, protecting the vaults with precision interventions that left their atmosphere untouched. Meanwhile, museums and educational institutions embraced the new possibilities of storytelling through technology. In 2021, an immersive exhibit called Underneath Edinburgh opened in the Museum of Scotland. Visitors donned headsets to walk digitally reconstructed corridors of the vaults, seeing them as they were believed to appear in the early 19th century. Artificial lighting recreated the flicker of candle flames. Spatial audio simulated the muffled sounds of footsteps and distant street noise from above. For the first time, the public could experience the underground world without setting foot below the surface. The effect was haunting and deeply human. Not a ghost story, but a history lesson rendered in atmosphere. Technology has also begun to bridge the divide between myth and fact. A joint project between university researchers and local historians aims to map every rumor associated with the vaults and cross-reference it with verified archaeological data. By visualizing legends alongside reality, they hope to show how folklore evolves from fragments of truth. For example, the enduring tale of sealed plague victims beneath the vaults has no historical basis, but radar scans have confirmed that certain chambers were indeed sealed intentionally. The reason was structural, not medical, yet such details show how easily necessity becomes myth. The researchers' digital archive doesn't seek to disprove the legends, but to trace how they form, spread, and persist, turning cultural memory itself into a kind of archaeology. The economic and cultural importance of the vaults has also reshaped how the city approaches them. The tours that once emphasized ghostly thrills now increasingly focus on verified history, highlighting the craftsmanship and endurance behind the structure. Many guides now use tablets to show historical photos, diagrams, and 3D overlays while leading groups through the vaults. Visitors can see what the chambers once looked like, filled with merchants' goods or crowded with families, their dim lanterns illuminating the low ceilings. It's a delicate balance, preserving the mystery without letting it eclipse the truth. In 2024, a new preservation initiative proposed using digital projection to recreate the vault's original textures on restored walls. Instead of repainting or reconstructing damaged sections, high-resolution images captured by laser scans would be projected onto the stone, restoring appearance without altering authenticity. This approach, sometimes called reversible restoration, reflects a modern philosophy. To protect the integrity of history, you must accept its imperfections. The cracks, stains, and scars of time are not flaws. They are the record itself. Beyond technology, the vaults have become a focal point for education and public engagement. Local schools now include underground history in their urban studies curricula. University students in architecture, history, and digital preservation use the vaults as case studies for interdisciplinary research. Each new generation brings a different question to the same stone chambers. Not just who built them or who lived there, but what they say about how humans inhabit space, adapt to hardship, and forget their own past. There's an irony in how technology, the symbol of modernity, is now being used to preserve a space born of the Industrial Revolution. The vaults, once the byproduct of progress, have become its beneficiary. But beneath all the data and documentation, one thing remains unchanged: the silence. Even as sensors hum and digital models flicker on screens, the real vaults remain dim and still. The air down there hasn't changed in centuries. The walls still breathe moisture. Every sound echoes a little too long. Technology may capture their form, but their soul, the weight of forgotten lives, the chill of the stone, can only be felt in person. To walk through the vaults today is to walk between centuries. Above you, modern life rushes forward, electric lights, glass storefronts, and smartphones glowing in the night. Below, the rhythm slows. The city's noise fades into a distant hum. Each arch and corridor whispers reminders of what came before. The vaults endure not because of ghosts or superstition, but because they tell a story too human to disappear. And as long as Edinburgh stands, that story, carved in stone, sealed in darkness, and reborn through light, will remain alive beneath the city's feet. In the quiet hours of the night, when Edinburgh's streets are nearly empty and the last echoes of footsteps fade against the stone, the city feels suspended between centuries. The wind carries the faint scent of rain from the North Sea, and somewhere beneath the cobbles the vaults wait, unchanged, unmoved, eternal. Down there, time is slower. You can feel the past pressing close, breathing through the walls. The same stones that once held merchants, beggars, and wanderers now hold silence, but the silence is not empty. It listens. Standing in those chambers, the world above seems unreal, a fragile illusion built on forgotten ground. You think of the masons who laid the bridge's first stones in 1785, their hands blistered from chisel and hammer, unaware that they were creating something more than a structure. They were building a second city beneath the first, a mirror of human life, stripped of sunlight but filled with endurance. What they began in practicality became a monument to survival. Every arch is a story of labor, every scar in the wall, a record of existence. The vaults are a reminder that history is not just a list of dates or rulers. It's a weight, one that settles into the foundations of every city, invisible yet immovable. Above ground, progress continues in glass and steel, but below, the earth keeps its memories. Edinburgh has learned to live with that duality. It is a city that walks on its own shadow, aware that its greatness was built on hidden suffering. The vaults make that truth impossible to ignore. They are the physical embodiment of a question that every civilization must eventually face. What do we choose to remember, and what do we bury? Visitors often describe an unease they can't quite explain. It isn't fear, not in the traditional sense. It's recognition, the feeling that you've stepped into a place where humanity has left its fingerprint in the dust. The vaults are not haunted by ghosts. They're haunted by memory itself. You can sense the thousands who once moved through those narrow spaces. The cobbler bent over his workbench, the woman nursing a child in the flicker of candlelight, the laborer collapsing after a day spent lifting stone. They are all gone, yet their presence lingers, not in spirit, but in the echo of what they endured. Modern lights now line parts of the vaults, guiding tourists through spaces once thought lost forever. Cameras capture every corner, every rough edge, but the darkness remains sovereign. Technology can illuminate, but it cannot domesticate the underground. There's something primal about being there, a confrontation with what progress forgets. The walls whisper lessons that no textbook can teach, that civilizations are fragile, that comfort is temporary, that beneath every monument lies a struggle we would rather not see. And yet, there's beauty in that honesty. The vaults do not exist to horrify, but to remind. They remind us that cities are living organisms, growing layer upon layer, mistake upon mistake, triumph upon triumph. The vaults beneath Southbridge are not ruins of failure. They are proof of adaptation. They tell us that even in darkness, people built, lived, loved, and endured. They found ways to exist when the world above left them behind. In that sense, the vaults are not a symbol of despair. They are a testament to resilience. As Edinburgh moves further into the digital age, the contrast only deepens. Data centers hum where factories once roared. Artificial light replaces the glow of candles. Yet the vaults endure, silent and patient, watching from below. They remind us that the future, no matter how bright, always casts a shadow. The past does not vanish. It settles into the earth, waiting to be remembered. When you leave the vaults and step back into the night air, there's a moment of disorientation. The city feels lighter, almost too light, as if its beauty hides something too vast to comprehend. You look up at the spires, at the flicker of lights and windows, and realize that every street, every doorway, every bridge stands on a foundation of forgotten lives. The vaults do not need to be seen to be felt. Their presence reaches upward, shaping the city's soul. In the end, the vaults of Edinburgh are not just about what lies beneath. They are about what lies within cities, within history, within ourselves. They teach that every civilization, no matter how advanced, carries its past in its bones. And if you listen closely through the hum of the modern world, you can still hear it. The faint echo of footsteps, the drip of water, the quiet persistence of those who refuse to disappear. The stone endures. The stories remain. And beneath the heart of Edinburgh, the darkness remembers.